Welcome to Defeat Your Cravings, hosted by Dr. Glenn Livingston, PhD. Dr. Glenn is a clinical psychologist and former multi-million-dollar consultant to the big food industry and uses his experience to help you defeat your cravings. This show will help you to focus on dramatically reducing cravings and leaving the diet mentality behind, so you can more easily and effortlessly achieve your health, fitness, and body composition goals. Please remember, no doctor-patient relationship is created via this show, and you are responsible for confirming any changes to your diet, health, or psychological routines with an appropriately licensed professional before implementing them. Before we get started, if you haven't downloaded the free smartphone app to access dozens of these recordings all in one place, as well as to avail yourself of a confidential community for support, motivation, and assistance, please visit the podcast link on defeatyourcravings.com as soon as possible. And now, here's your host, Dr. Glenn Livingston.
Hey, it's the very good Dr. Glenn Livingston with defeatyourcravings.com, and I am here with
Howie Jacobson of Ask Howie and Plant Yourself.
And we wanted to talk to you about an interesting concept related to guilt and overeating. Isn't that right, sir?
Yes, it is. I concur.
And we are two Jewish doctors talking about guilt, which is apropos, right?
I think we must have over a century's worth of experience.
I think we do have over a century's worth of experience with guilt, both brought up by Jewish mothers. What if you forgave yourself for absolutely everything, is my quote this week. What if you forgave yourself for absolutely everything? Guilt assumes an odd function in the life of an overeater. Like physical pain, human beings are equipped with the capacity for guilt as an attention-getting mechanism. The pain of touching a hot stove is supposed to get your attention long enough to figure out how to avoid it. Mistakes with self-care are supposed to get your attention long enough to change there too. We're supposed to turn guilt into responsibility and then confidently let it go. Unfortunately, the nature of toxic pleasure corrupts the natural, healthy function of guilt. The belief that we're severely flawed and incapable of resisting more overeating results in the acquisition of even more toxic pleasure, so the brain can get stuck perseverating on guilt for recent and long ago mistakes. Remember, calories were scarce in primitive times, so when the brain found a way of acquiring them, it wanted to leverage it as much as possible. It's therefore learned to exaggerate and hold on to guilt to acquire more calories. After all, if you were a confident, self-disciplined human being, you'd probably eat a lot less slop, which the primitive brain thinks you need to survive. For this reason, overeaters are riddled with guilt, which in turn perpetuates the overeating cycle. But there's a reliable way out of this conundrum. First, take exquisite care of your survival needs. Since motivated perseveration on guilt is driven by a fear of not surviving without the calories it helps you acquire, you've got to show your primitive brain there's no danger of starving. This involves much more than logical statements. You've got to keep your body consistently well nourished. When your body feels nourished, there's a lot less reason for the brain to use guilt to acquire enough calories. Second, make sure you've pinpointed and articulated the reasons for your specific mistakes, as well as how you'll avoid them in the future. Do you need to modify your food plan? Refute the squeal that convinced you to break it? Without doing this, the brain believes there's still a threat and will hold on to guilt until the danger is removed. Finally, forgive yourself for absolutely all your previous mistakes. The best you can do is take responsibility for and correct them, learning all you can for each one. If you've taken care of your survival needs and done your best to adjust your cells, you deserve this relief. Indeed, anything less leaves you vulnerable to more self-destructive thoughts, emotions, and behavior. I forgive myself for absolutely everything. Okay, that's my quote of the week, and I'm curious what you think.
I love this.
Do you?
I was reading this over. Yeah, I do. I think it can go in so many different directions, and it can stay right where it is and be useful for someone who doesn't want to go in any of those directions, who just wants to say, like, I just want to change the way I'm thinking about food. So, like, the first thing that struck me is that basically everything our brains are doing are just trying to help us survive and possibly thrive. You're a clinical psychologist. You've seen people who come in who are just, racked by guilt about things that they did or didn't do like decades ago. The brain is not trying to make us feel bad. It's not trying to make us feel good. It's just trying to get us to do stuff. In that case, sort of the brain is stuck in this loop. Like if you had this guilt that was not resolved the second you changed course, It's your brain trying to have you do something in the past, right? Like, don't have insulted her. Or,
Yeah.
the fact that the brain will use that to get calories. What that struck me as is like your brain has a perfectly good system to help you get calories now, which is called hunger. Right? And it's amazing to me, as I was reading what you sent me, that the brain would privilege guilt over hunger or think that hunger is not enough. And I don't know all the reasons, but I suspect one of them is the food environment in which we find ourselves with all this stuff that isn't really food. I'd love for you to kind of unpack that a little bit for me.
I'm not sure how much more I can unpack it. I have the same opinion that you do. And these are all my hypotheses, by the way, and my observations from having worked with a couple of thousand clients over the last 8 years. I just have the very strong impression from seeing that when I walk people through what happened, sometimes I'll ask them to play it over again and ask them what they would do. And then after we do that, I ask them, well, how do you want to change your current plans? What's your current food plan? Do you need to have any more reminders in place? Have you eaten today? What are your plans for eating the rest of the day? When I walk them through that and we arrive at a clear plan to avoid the mistake in the future, and we ensure that they're really well nourished and self-regulated, the guilt seems to disappear. This is my very strong hypothesis from everything I've researched about binge eating and overeating, that it's just a matter of the brain perceiving a threat. I've been reading a little bit about a threat model in dream analysis, like some of the old analytic models are seeming to lose sway with recent evidence, but there's a new model that suggests that we dream to rehearse the avoidance of new threats. It's just really clear to me that the brain does get stuck and prioritize the avoidance of threats in the environment. And so I think that this perseveration on guilt is also driven by the perception of threat. There's a past experience that it can't seem to resolve. It might have resulted in a threat to your physical well-being from some of the poison you put in your system. It might have resulted in a threat to your physical well-being because you've eaten a lot of food in the modern food environment, which doesn't really contain the nutrition that you need to take care of your body. But so when you take care of all those things, it seems to me like the guilt just melts away. And I tell people, well, we need to turn guilt into responsibility and then you'll be fine. And it seems to be true. It's certainly true in my own case. I've seen it with client after client. So I'm not sure how much more I could unpack about the nutritional elements, except to say that I think it's a big part of it. And here's the other thing that I observe. When people come to me having binge and obsessing about they're not going to be able to stop it, they feel powerless to stop it, they really want more, or lower self wants more. If I can get them to take a half a pound of leafy green vegetables, put it in the blender and drink it down pretty quickly, assuming there's no medical reason they can't do that, I find that they suddenly feel an awful lot better. My hypothesis about that is that the modern food environment, all the bags and boxes and containers, has kind of hijacked the survival drive, made the survival drive in the reptilian brain think that that's where the good stuff is, but the good stuff isn't there. There's not really much nutrition there. And so the brain keeps perseverating on, I want more, I want more, I want more. So I've seen that perseveration go away when people go have that half pound of leafy greens. So you just kind of put it all together and you say, turn guilt into responsibility, make an intellectual plan to avoid it, make sure you're well nourished, and that's how you walk away from getting stuck with neurotic guilt.
What it reminds me of, the way you say like the brain will use guilt to get what it thinks you need, reminds me of like my career doing home repairs. Our toolbox in my house growing up was like one of those plastic containers that you get like a quart of soup from a Chinese restaurant. It had like 2 little screwdrivers and I think like some strangely like a little awl punch with a wooden handle and nothing else, like not even a wrench. And so then when I grew up and I had my own house, I would start to get certain tools, but I wouldn't have the right tools. So I would use like, scissors as for leverage. I would use a screwdriver where you really, needed a box cutter. And so the brain is like, okay, I don't have the right tool for the job is not here. The hunger is not working. So I'm going to use whatever tools at hand. Oh, guilt. Guilt gets this person to consume.
Yeah.
Okay. we'll just keep using guilt. I'll keep using the screwdriver to try to pry up the loose floorboards until I scratch something or I stab myself in the inner thigh, or like, it's all I've got. I'm going to use it.
That's a really good metaphor. That's exactly what's going on. It's the wrong tool, but the brain thinks that it's all it has until you give it the right tool. Jewish families are not known for their facility with fixing stuff around the house.
See, I didn't want to bring that up because I didn't want to feed that absolutely true, in my opinion, stereotype. If anyone's interested, the comedian Jackie Mason had a terrific riff on the difference between Jews and Gentiles when it comes to fixing things.
What did he say?
The car breaks down, the Gentile gets out, opens the hood and moves things around, unscrews things, calibrates things, and it turns into an airplane and he flies away. The Jewish guy opens the hood, looks at it and goes, boy, it sure is busy in there.
Right, exactly. I grew up not only in a Jewish family, but a family of psychologists and psychotherapists. And when something broke in the house, everybody knew how to ask it how it felt and nobody knew how to fix it. That's my thing. Okay, so I forgive myself for absolutely everything is a mantra that you tell yourself once you've gone through this, just to really put the lid on the fact that you've done the work, you've turned guilt into responsibility, you've taken care of your body, you've nutrified yourself, and it's okay to move on. It's a proactive certitude that I find helps cleanse your soul of what's happened and lets you focus on the present and aiming at the bullseye in the present.
So when you say absolutely everything, do you mean absolutely everything? Like things not related to food? Like things that, if you told someone else, they might be shocked and think that that's unforgivable? Like really awful things that we can do to each other, or that we can do to our environment or to ourselves?
Let me just say that most overeaters, I find, tend to be not sociopaths who have a long history of doing awful things to other people, but rather people who have tortured themselves unnecessarily with guilt over small mistakes. I deal in the realm of food mistakes, and I do find that when people consistently forgive themselves for food mistakes, that it becomes easier to forgive themselves for other things that they've done. Let's say that someone had murdered someone and caused horrible grief to their family, but had gone to jail or been in jail or, paid their debts to society and struggling to figure out how can they be present and contribute to the world and what's the most good they could do for the world at this point going forward. I find that if they're constantly working through their food mistakes and forgiving themselves for food mistakes, that it becomes easier for them to move forward and make a contribution and make the world a better place from this point forward. If there are things you have genuinely done that have hurt people and you haven't figured out how to make amends and you haven't really made things whole in the world, and there's some things you can do that you can never make things whole. But if you haven't really made your best effort to make things whole, then I wouldn't want to encourage sociopathy. There is a function of guilt in the world, and that probably does require some more thought and some work. On the other hand, I also think that when you do everything you can, that it is necessary to forgive yourself, and that on balance, life is better for you and other people if you do. Does that make sense?
Yep. Yeah, I remember someone once told me that the people who feel a lot of shame and worry about what their lives would be like if they didn't feel the shame are exactly the people who shouldn't feel shame. It's the people who don't feel any shame that he wishes would feel shame.
Yeah, no, exactly. And that's a defining feature of sociopathy is people don't feel guilt and shame. And you have to help them to feel more guilt and shame.
The next thing that came up for me, which was, I'm hearing this phrase like, forgive yourself for absolutely everything, or I forgive myself for absolutely everything. And then lots of these subterranean echoes from deep in my psyche come up. And the next one was like, well, then do I have to forgive others? Like if the principle applies to me, what about the people that I've been holding grudges and been angry at and resentful? Does that have anything to do with defeat your cravings? Am I going off on a tangent? Or could that actually block self-forgiveness because somebody could say, well, I can't go that far, so I don't even want to take the first step?
I have a dual answer to that. Part of my answer is that there is a fundamental decision we have to make in life about whether to get even or to get well. This is a very intellectual understanding, but it's still true. you'll meet people who live to get even and you'll meet people who live to get well. It's a very different way of life. And most people will say that they're living to get well and the best revenge is a good life and that kind of thing. But when you look at their actions or you look at the conflicts they're experiencing, it's really hard for them to put that into action. I think it's hard to put into action because on some level, it's just an intellectual understanding. I think there's a natural animalistic desire to get even that can get stuck in people and they don't know what to do with that energy. So we live on a continuum and we kind of understand what the goal is. And I think that the more that you can strive to get well, the better your life is going to be. I also think that there's a phenomenon of neurotic guilt for not forgiving other people. Like I had some people do some awful things in my life. There's still a part of me that would like to see the fleas of 1,000 camels infest their nether regions. There's still a part of me that would do that. But I don't really put much energy into that. I recognize it as a natural human desire. I redirect my energy towards what I want to accomplish and what good I want to do in the world. I do my best to let that go. I don't find that the little bit of energy I still have left, there is a part of me that really would like to get even, but I don't feel that that little bit of energy is stopping me from forgiving myself from absolutely everything with food. Those are my thoughts on that. What do you think?
I think there's ways that for some people an intellectual exploration can be very liberating. It's not like, deep psychoanalysis or anything, but just one of your dicta, that I have found very helpful over the years is about the difference between the past and the future around, commit with something and forgive yourself with something else. What was yeah, you can tell what an impression it's made on me.
Commit with perfection and forgive yourself with dignity.
Right. Like if you think about it intellectually, you feel like having this kind of conversation, you can really ask, like, is there free will? Like, are we just the product of our genes and our environment? And if so, there's nothing I could have done in the past any different from how I did it. Okay, well, that happened. I can learn from it now, but I also want to cleave that. I don't want to say, like, at this moment, I have 100% free will. Like that's the difference between the present and any other time. Any other time is completely determined, but in this moment I have free will. But if the past is completely determined and there was no free will, I was the product of my genes and my upbringing, then there really was nothing I could have done differently. And therefore, it's almost like, well, there's nothing to forgive. I don't have to forgive the toaster when it burns me, when I forget that it's on and I reach across to get the coffee and I scald my wrist. The toaster does not require forgiveness.
Yeah. Well, that's a good point, knowing that you always have free will in the present, which is why you can always use the present moment to be healthy. Do you think that the quote would be more powerful if I said I forgive myself for absolutely everything with food?
I don't know.
It would avoid the conflict that people might have about not being able to forgive themselves for other things.
I'm the guy who has ideas and falls in love with them, and sometimes they're good and sometimes they're bad. You're the guy who has ideas and tries it out on 1,000 people and comes back and says, oh, I was right about this, but wrong about that. So
I think you do that also. I think you're very open to growth and change.
Yeah, I really fall in love with my ideas sometimes. I'm like, this feels so true. You feel the same way, but you've built into your business. I mean, partly because your business is scaled and mine isn't, you have the opportunity to run these tests. And you do. Part of your integrity for me is saying, I don't know, go see it. I don't know whether a global moratorium and amnesty on all guilt would be more effective. Like I'm thinking about myself in my high school and college years when I was trying to date. I was a jerk. like not on purpose. Like I wasn't trying to hurt people, but I hurt people. I was dismissive. I was male chauvinist. I can look back and wince at the ways in which I treated the girls that I was interested in and then no longer interested in. And that feels very different from I ate an entire cake once because I was upset. I think it's probably a lower bar and it might be an easier first ask. And then if people are like, okay, well, but I still eat because of the guilt about that girl that I took to the high school prom, then we can deal with that.
I tend to land in the same place. After this conversation, I tend to believe that focus on food guilt and leave the rest to you and your psychotherapist. I tend to believe that. And that's my mission. That's my most important job. As much as I'm still a psychotherapist at heart, what I do in the world and what I do with my clients is not really to solve their deepest emotional problems, but to give them a very practical tool to stop overeating and let them figure out what they want to do with their emotions on their own or with the aid of a professional. So I think this is a worthwhile conversation to have to put that boundary around it. I appreciate it.
Great. I think last week you said this quote, like the one useful thing you got from OA, from Overeaters Anonymous, was the dictum, if you want to find out why you're overeating, stop overeating.
Yeah.
I think there's something about this work, and you'd have to tell me, I don't know if you've surveyed people about this, people have a sense that their behaviors are outside of their control. The metaphor of the elephant and the rider. Like we're the rider and the elephant is just going wherever the hell it wants. And occasionally it's going in the direction we want it to go, but a lot of the time it's just trampling over fields and knocking over acacia trees and whatever. And we're just kind of hanging on saying, please stop, please slow down. We have this learning, this identity belief that we cannot control our behaviors. And I think that when people come to Defeat Your Cravings and they discover that in this one domain, which is a limited domain of their lives, that they can actually overcome their cravings and change their behaviors in accordance with the rider, it's a disconfirmation of a global identity belief.
Yes.
And I feel like once people do that, not only are they in a position to now discover why they were overeating, but they feel like they have more confidence. Like, okay, there is a way to change these behaviors that have felt like they have been ruling my life to my chagrin for years or decades.
Because the experience of feeling powerless and helpless to stop overeating is as strong as anything else in life. And so when you have that disconfirmation and you realize you actually can take control, that does provide the foundation to be able to challenge all of these other things that you always believed were true, including a depth of guilt that you've been holding on to for past deeds that perhaps you could challenge and work through in other ways. So I appreciate you saying that, Howie.
Love it.
And that brings us to the end of today's broadcast of Defeat Your Cravings, hosted by Dr. Glenn Livingston. If you'd like to find out more about the products and services Dr. Glenn offers to help you dramatically reduce your cravings and stop overeating in 90 days or less, please visit defeatyourcravingscoaching.com. That's defeatyourcravingscoaching.com. Thanks.